This is Amanda Draper, and this is my week 2 video. So I look like a hot mess. I literally just got off of a pretty hectic 12-hour shift, but I am more than ready to do this week 2 video. So I'm going to start by defining some of the important terms from this chapter. Of course, the first one would be disaster. Disaster is an event that causes 3 of the possible outcomes, which could be at least 100 deaths, at least 100 injuries, or at least damages costing the U.S. at least $1 million on economic damages. The next thing would be the theories of disaster, or like why people say the theories happen, which there's 4. The first one being acts of God or fate, which are things that people say like, that's just the way things are, this is God's plan, let's just accept it and move on. The next one would be the acts of nature. This approach pretty much is saying that the large scale of death and destruction is due to nature rather than like humans. The intersection of society and nature would be the third one, which is saying that we are putting ourselves in the way of the hazards, such as we know where floodplains are, we know where hurricane areas are common, or where tornadoes are common, and people are still putting themselves in harm's way by moving and living in these areas. And the last one would be the avoidable human constructions, which obviously is disasters we bring upon ourselves. The next thing that I thought was pretty important in this chapter was the stakeholders, which are people who take a personal interest in the outcome of a policy. Everyone is affected by this, is included, because all of us are affected by decisions that the policymakers and the elected officials make in some kind of way. The next definition would be the emergency management stakeholders. And the difference between this is these are the people now who are affected by decisions made by specifically the emergency managers and the policymakers in their particular community. There are also specific categories of stakeholders. There are 3 of these. The first one being the social groups, which are the households. This is the primary areas that provide shelter from routine environmental conditions. The second is the economic groups, which are like businesses. These are the ones that organize the flow of goods and services, and this can be greatly affecting either the local, regional, or even the national economy. And the last category being political groups, which is the government, which is actually which category that many of the emergency management policies are set up by. Speaking of setting up policies, there is the policy process model. This has 5 different steps, and the first being the agenda setting. This is when we bring to light the problem to the government. The next is the policy formation, which is coming up with a solution for the problem that we decided on. The third being policy adoption, which is providing support and evidence to convince the government that they should be on board with the specific solution that we came up with. Policy implementation, which is obviously applying the government's policy to whatever problem we decided. And the last one being the policy evaluation, which is obviously evaluating the effectiveness of the policy and seeing if there's any improvements that are needed. So with all these definitions, I think they're most important to understand because they allow us to see how and why decisions are made, at which level, the power each level holds, and how they could possibly affect the public. So the muddiest point for me, I think, well, I guess what doesn't make sense, maybe, is just the theories of disaster. Are they more of a personal preference as to why people think things happen? And are these the only four that people could possibly have? Do people have other ideas of why disasters happen? I don't know. I just thought it was interesting because I never really thought that there could be people could have different ideas of why things happen, but I guess I don't know. And so I guess I'll end this with the question to open the class discussion with. I think I would say if you think about your future career or like the line of the work that you are planning to going in, what category of community stakeholder groups would you be included in and why? I will leave it with that, and I would like to, I'm pretty interested in seeing what kind of responses you guys would think and what kind of like applying what we learned into our actual lives.